Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic Podcast. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and with me today is Rod. It's so good to see you, Rod. How you been, brother?
I've been tanned, brother.
Yeah, look at that. I see the
Yeah,
tan. It's
it's been like
shocking.
a couple of weeks since I've been on here. I've
That's correct.
been down to Slovenia to give a talk in Ljubljana. We say that correctly, the capital of Slovenia for
Right.
Live Not by Lies. And then I went over to the Slovenian coast for a weekend. It's been like 5 or 6 years since I've been to the beach, and it was great.
That's nice. Yeah.
It was so wonderful, just to hang out there, get some reading done, eat some grilled octopus and grilled fish. So,
That's great.
living
That's
the
so
life.
Mediterranean.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a yeah. Well, Rhode Island, where I am, is really one of the great places to be in the summer. We have great beaches all over the place, and one just right down the road from us, and so we try to get there quite a bit. But it's been really kind of an overcast, very damp summer. We've had very little sort of just unadulterated sunny days. It's been strange, very hot, humid though. It's been very Louisiana-esque, so not too crazy about that on this end. Well, all right, look, this is episode number 28 here, Rod. We're making our way into this first season, I guess we would call it. But today I'd like to talk about two main things, just to give our audience a heads up. We're going to talk about Rod's story here that he broke last night, American time. That would have been the 19th of July, about this Pegasus surveillance story, which is, I think, really an important one. And so far, not one that's really been reported that much, or has not been talked about too much here in the United States. And then secondly, I'd like to talk about Pope Francis's latest Motu Proprio. So anyway, let's start off with Pegasus. So Rod, what is going on with the story, and why does it matter to us human beings?
Yeah, well, it's a really big story in Europe right now and in the UK, much less so in the US as we're talking. I was reading the New York Times and the Washington Post last night, and they've noticed it, but it's much bigger over here.
Yeah.
And what they found is this. Investigative journalists were able to show that an Israeli company has been selling this spyware called Pegasus. It's some software that they've sold to governments, including the government of Hungary, where I am now.
Right.
And this software allows anybody who owns it to get into the smartphones of anybody they want to very easily. In fact, with Apple phones, at least, the person doesn't even have to click on anything. They can just get into the phone. This is the software exploiting holes in the operating system. And what it does, it gives the person who's invaded the system, it gives them access to everything. They can read all your text, all your emails. They can activate your camera and the microphone without you being aware of it. I mean, it's it's the end of privacy for anybody targeted. And what they found, a lot of countries have done this, mostly authoritarian countries like Middle Eastern governments, but the government of Mexico did it too.
Interesting.
And the Hungarian government did it, and they found proof that the Hungarian government targeted journalists who were looking into things that of interest to the Hungarian government, but also activists and political opposition figures and lawyers. It's a horrible thing. I've been somebody who's been completely open about the fact that I generally support this government, the government of Viktor Orban. However, this is a real blow. This should not happen in a free country. And Hungary is, despite what you've read, it's a free country, but this is a bad thing.
Right.
And there's outrage here right now. The opposition said they're going to have parliamentary inquiries about it. I have to say, though, that in the conversations I've had just today, after it's broken, with Hungarians, most of them think it's bad, but they all are pretty blasé about it. They assume that it's been going on all the time, and they assume that every other country in the world is doing this too.
Well, so let me jump in real quick on that one, Rod. How does it hit your ears? I mean, both you and I have smartphones. You and I have, look, your last book was basically talking about the building out of the soft totalitarianism, and so this is just a sort of a tool as part of that advance. Sure. How does it hit you? I mean, how is it shock you? Is it moving you? Because for me, I'm hearing it, I'm like, I'm kind of 2 months. I'm like, first of all, well, that's terrible sounding, and then I'm like, sort of like, really?
Yeah,
I'm weird. It's weird. I don't know what to make of that.
No. I think your attitude is exactly mine. That it shocks me, but it doesn't surprise me. What I mean by that is you hate to read that it's happening,
Right.
and to have. I mean, it's horrifying to read these things. I've read interviews in the Czech press with a Hungarian journalist who was targeted, and he actually doesn't blame Viktor Orban. He said, "I don't think it happened at that level. I think that somebody lower down the totem pole identified me, but it makes doing journalism impossible because nobody, a source, potential source, has to expect that they're being tracked too. But we have to remember that Edward Snowden told us that the U.S. government already has the power to do this
Right.
through the NSA. And Snowden writes in his book about how he himself, at one point when he was at NSA, used their software to open up the camera and the microphone of a professor in Indonesia, a guy who was a dissident of some sort, and how he, Snowden, observed the professor working on his laptop with his daughter in his lap. So,
and that's got to be like what, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Right.
We, in fact, just today, Kale, I was having lunch with a visiting journalist who's from another EU country, and we were talking about this, and he told me that a decade ago, one of his good friends, who is a very senior figure at basically that nation's equivalent of the FBI,
right,
he warned the journalist, listen, don't get a smartphone. If you get a smartphone, you have to assume that it's compromised, meaning that they, a decade ago, had the capabilities of doing this. So, why would any government? I can see why governments who don't have the intelligence capabilities, technological capabilities, to spy on their citizens like this would buy this software. In fact, the Washington Post reported that the Israeli software company went around the U.S. to try to sell this software to local governments and others, but the price tag was too high. That's a pretty disconcerting thing to read. You would like to think that the local government or local law enforcement would say, no, not in a free country.
Right.
No, they would have liked it, but price tag was too high.
It's too expensive. That's not exactly encouraging. Those are not encouraging thoughts or words, are they, Rod?
No. But get this. The Washington Post also reported that some senior officials with the Trump, the Biden, and the Obama administration all were hired to lobby for this Israeli company to help it get contracts. I mean, Michael Flynn was one of them, Trump's very brief national security advisor. So I think the point is that we need to be outraged about this because it's outrageous. We also need to keep in mind that this is probably not just a Hungarian thing or something done in Mexico or by these other authoritarian governments. It's another reminder to me that I really need to get off the smartphone. But if they can do it to the smartphone, they can do it to your laptop too.
Well, that's why I and maybe that's why I have this, I'm embarrassed to say, kind of shrug with it, because I feel like, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? I spend all of my working life, when I'm not literally in the classroom, on my computer.
Yeah.
I have my smartphone with me all the time. I'm on it quite a bit, embarrassingly so, but there it is. It is so much a part of my life, and I'm struggling. I mean, how would I even attempt to quote unquote get off the grid? I just don't even know what. I mean, look, what's fascinating to me about this is that we know that Facebook and Google et al. Have track us, right? They use our data. We are free to them, right? So that they can sell my activity, your activity, your children's activity, your mom's activity, to people who want that information in order to monetize it. So that's chilling. We know this from movies like The Social Network and things that, we read, you've talked about in your books, Rod, and on your blog. And I don't know why that gets a collective shrug either. But now we have the sort of the other, part of the maw, which is the government. And they are now sort of mining our data as well. And so, What's left, sir?
Okay, but get this: if the Israelis say that they've been marketing this only to law enforcement agencies and governments for legitimate um, purposes of fighting crime and all that, which I don't believe.
Well,
You know good and well that
how can you believe that? That's
no, how can you believe
ridiculous.
it? But think about this. What if you are a global corporation
Hmm.
and you want to get a leg up on your competitors? You can pay for this software.
Right.
Why are your competitors, are they supposed to believe that their smartphones are not compromised? I mean,
Right.
it's incredibly destabilizing. And I think the only way that we choose not to let ourselves feel destabilized by it is just to shrug and say, oh, look, I just have to hope it doesn't happen to me. But the thing is, what's going to happen here, and this is the most troubling thing about this happening in Hungary, is the government of Prime Minister Viktor Orban is really
Right.
powerful. I mean, it's been elected several times. It's coming up for re-election next year. They didn't have to do this, but they are trying so hard to stay on top of any potential threat to them that if the report is true, and I think it is, that they went this far. What it is, that the danger is, whether it happens in Hungary or anywhere else, is that any government that uses this software to spy on its own people it'll be very hard to get them out, because anybody who, even in a democracy, because anybody in opposition has to figure that when they meet, if anybody has a smartphone there, that they're being spied on.
Yeah,
And
this is the kind of thing, every now and again, Watergate pops, like the actual Watergate scandal, not all the mini gates since, but, Watergate pops back into my head, and I kind of look back and scratch my head and think, man, that was cute.
yeah,
I mean, ooh,
well,
spied on spied in a hotel, in a room at the Watergate Hotel. Like, ooh, what kind of flyers, they're gonna use against us in this. I mean, it's hilarious, right? I
yeah,
mean,
well,
can you imagine what somebody like, a Nixon, could have sort of imagined doing with this kind of software?
exactly. And when I was working on this blog post about it last night, I ran across a recent report saying that the Pentagon has been in talks with some UK company to use its services to mine the online searches of active duty armed forces people, to check their searches to see if there might be any extremism or white supremacy there. One of the phrases they were looking for is something like the truth about Black Lives Matter, anything negative about Black Lives Matter, because they say that if you criticize Black Lives Matter, that could mean that you're a white supremacist. Now think about that. This was something the Pentagon, not the Biden administration, though they are in charge of this, but the Pentagon was trying to do to go after extremists. Now, I think this is what's going to happen. I think that this power it's like the ring in Lord of the
It
Rings.
really is. That's funny. I know I'm going to
Yeah,
dork out here with the Tolkien references too, but I agree. I think it's the ring all over
yeah,
again.
yeah. But they believe that we can use this only for the good. We'll use this to get rid of the white supremacist, or if a conservative, in the case of Orban, against those who threaten the regime. And there are some bad actors out there, no doubt about it. But everybody always thinks they're going to use it for the good.
Oh, look,
And
this is the whole point of the temptation of Boromir, and I'm gonna go there, people. We're going full Lord of the Rings dork mode here, but I mean that's the whole point. I mean, Boromir wants to use the ring to fight Sauron, right? It's not a bad thing that he wants to fight Sauron. He and his family are literally on the front lines of the battle for Middle Earth, right? It's not like he wants to go use it so that he can make himself, Lord and ruler of Middle Earth and, get a sweet, anyway, that's always the thing that you tell yourself, right? You always tell yourself that, oh, I want the ring, but I want to use the ring for good. And I can imagine Orban and his government and any of the governments sort of tell themselves the same kind of lie, that, oh, what, but but I'm going to use it for the good. And I think that's the, the greased path that we use for self-justification to avail ourselves of such things.
look, and I have every confidence that external spy agencies are using whatever software they have available to them to spy on the Hungarian government.
Yeah.
And in fact, we know the U.S. did this. The U.S. I believe it was under Obama, spied on Angela Merkel. They tapped her phone. I mean, they're allies. But in the case of Hungary and these other nations who've been caught, they were doing it to their own citizens.
Well, maybe that's the turn, Rod. Maybe that's the thing that kind of starts to get my hackles up a little bit. It's like I expect my government, and maybe here I'm just going to be a sort of good old-fashioned American nationalist here, but I expect my government to engage in these kind of activities on other governments, and certainly other governments who are potentially hostiles to us. Like, I mean, I think that's just sort of part of statecraft or international statecraft. Not that I'm proud of that or anything like, but I sort of expect my government to do that on my behalf. But I also expect my government not to then swivel the guns on me.
Well, and you remember the story a couple of weeks ago about how Tucker Carlson accused the NSA of monitoring his communications.
Yeah.
It seems clear what happened there was that they were monitoring the communications of people with ties to Putin, people in this country, which is legitimate for them to do. I mean, it's legal for them to do that.
Sure.
And they just got Tucker caught up in their net because he was trying to talk to these same people to arrange an interview with Vladimir Putin.
Right.
But now here's the thing, though. The government, let's say it acquired this information on Tucker, read his emails or his text or whatever, and as part of a legal operation against these Russians.
Okay.
Well, what's to stop them from using that information that they acquired legally, though accidentally, using that against him or against somebody else in the future, leaking it to, you know?
Right. And this is what we know. I mean, again, this is what we know. I sort of naively thought prior to 2016 that there were absolute firewalls in place, for these kind of surveillance programs, between, the portions of the government that are not directly involved with electoral politics or anything like that, or the FBI wouldn't use such things for political purposes, or the CIA or the NSA and all the. But we know pretty clearly that those rules, if they ever were really in place, were absolutely trounced and broken in the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. So I'm not sure what kind of trust I have. None, really.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I also have to ask myself, so if I don't have trust in them, what am I doing to protect myself?
Right.
And
well, so maybe that's where we go here, because that's where I'm struggling. Like, I'm a layman, you're a layman. You write for a living. I talk at this stupid camera, not even for a living. What am I talking about? For funsies. And, what are we going to do? How do we protect ourselves, our families, each other? I mean, what can be done?
Well, look, you and I both use Signal, the encrypted service.
Yep.
And what we've learned from this Pegasus thing is Signal can be cracked, can be hacked. And it's no protection at all. I ran this by a source of mine last night who's in the national security field. Right. And he said, yes, but Signal is better than nothing, because he said it's like putting a blast door. You have to bring a lot higher firepower to crack Signal. So that's something, but ultimately, if they want to target, meaning states and those with this software power, if they want to target you, they're coming after you. And it's real. If you're involved at all on the internet, you don't really have a lot of protection.
Right. And that's what I'm, I listen to lots of podcasts and whatnot. I mean, they have these, encryption services that, what are they called?
Proton Mail and things like that.
That's different. You can sort of attach it to your router and your browser so that all of your information remains private. I mean, is this Pegasus software penetrate through those kind of firewalls as well?
Yeah, as far as I understand it, and I would need to go back and reread it. I read a ton of stuff on it last night. Pegasus is because it gets into your phone and it can read you typing things into Signal. It doesn't, and WhatsApp, it doesn't actually crack them, though it does have that power, but it's able to get around them and read you typing things in before it's even sent out. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Okay, so in other words, do VPNs guard if I buy a VPN service for my family, for my devices? Does that guard against Pegasus, or is this saying that this gets through that as well?
I really don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah,
It's one that we all better be asking. And I got to tell you too, as the guy wrote "Live Not by Lies," I'm now thinking and hoping somebody will come up with a book that will talk about practical, technical things that we can do. Because my book is mostly about what are ways we can live that make us more resilient against this sort of thing. But I don't talk about are technical fixes or technical things that better the odds for people like us.
Well, if there's anybody in the audience, who wants to, please reach out to us, leave a comment, the General Eclectic Podcast at gmail.com. If you have any practical measures that you'd like to suggest, we're all ears here, because this Pegasus story, is certainly going to get bigger as the next couple of days unfold, I think, in the news cycle. It's really troubling, Rod.
Well, a friend of mine who is retired from the intelligence community told me before I came over to Hungary, he told me that he's working on ways that churches can protect themselves, because he's a devout Christian.
Yeah.
Churches can protect themselves from the surveillance that he firmly believes is coming as persecution ramps up. And he was talking to me about particular technical things, for example, people when they come into a church, putting their phones in, I guess, a Faraday cage, something like that. And it sounded, when I first heard it, my first thought was, that's kind of paranoid. But then by now I've been doing this long enough to where I realized that's not paranoid at all. And this guy did this for a living, so he knows whereof he speaks. Anyway, I hope it does get bigger play in America. I think probably the reason the Pegasus story hasn't been getting a lot of play is because there's no evidence yet that it was used in America. But again, if the Washington Post is correct, it was not used in America not because there were any scruples against it, but because it was just too expensive.
Well, my sneaking suspicion is that, if memory serves from the post I read late last night, Rod, that this is an Israeli company that had created this. I mean, okay, there's probably, maybe there's no need for agencies in the United States government to purchase Pegasus, because we probably have our own version of Pegasus homegrown here, right? I mean,
it's interesting. I mean,
that's got to be the case. I mean, come on. I mean, again, let's remember, a decade ago, Snowden, revealed all of this stuff about our own national security apparatus. I have to imagine that the technology has improved dramatically since his original revelation, right? I mean, it has to be. I mean, it would be stupid to say it's not.
Yeah, and remember, this was an Israeli private company. Right. So if this software is that previously was being held only by governments, they were the only ones with the power and the money and the technological know-how to build this sort of thing. If now it's being offered on the open market, I mean, to me, this could be the tech and privacy version of weapons of mass destruction being for sale on the open market.
Yeah. The movie that popped into my head with all this surveillance stuff, Rod, is, I don't know if you saw a movie, it was back in the day, it was with Tom Cruise, it was called The Minority Report.
Yeah.
And the whole
pre-crime.
Yeah, pre-crime. That's exactly that's exactly what I was thinking of. And it's a 2002 movie, if you can believe that. It's been a long time. But the premise, of course, of this is that the algorithm fed by these sort of precogs, which is an interesting sort of
precognition,
transhuman technology, that they could sort of pre-detect, certain patterns. And it's been a while since I've seen the movie, so apologies if I'm getting some of the details wrong. But it's sort of based on this sort of hyper intuition that got fed into an algorithm, and they could predict if, Rod or Kale were going to go commit a crime, and so that they would go in and rush in to arrest you before you committed the crime. And so it raises all kinds of questions, of course, about intent and if you're going to do a thing, is it the equivalent of doing the thing, and all that, and of course the horror for us, the horror that we have to contemplate is trust, right? Is trust in our authorities, trust in our institutions, that they will not violate basic freedoms, right? They will not violate us. And I'm just always interested, and this is a theme I think that you and I talk about quite a bit, is this notion of trust. We have talked about our rotten institutions.
I know where you're going with this.
Yes, we have talked about our rotten institutions, and so so we imagine your friends in Hungary, right? Even those who are perhaps Orban friendly, it's one of those things that's like doesn't quite pass the sniff test of trust, right? This idea that you're spying on your own people. So I think this is a theme that you and I talk about quite a bit, is the notion of trust. I mean, what does it mean to put something in trust?
Now, can I just stop you right there before we make this transition?
Yeah.
I had a conversation, one of the number of Hungarians I talked to this morning about this. This person was a journalist who said, the thing you have to remember is here in this country, before Orban, the government, the left-wing government, was fantastically corrupt. She said it was horrible.
Okay.
And so and I've heard this a number of times too, but she brought this up in the context of Pegasus.
Yeah.
She said, so when we hear today that the Fidesz government, the current government, is corrupt and scraping money off the top here and there, we hate it, but we also recognize that this is a normal part of politics in this region, and that you can't. It's just inaccurate to say, oh, this is something only the right does. She said that's just the problem with our politics.
Yeah,
people are so cynical about their leaders anyway. And I heard from one Hungarian, not a journalist, but somebody who supports the Fidesz government, who says that this might be bad, but there are things that are worse threats to this country than that, and Orban's on the right side of it, of these questions. And I think that's basically right. And this is why I said this on my blog, that I deplore that the government did this sort of thing, but it doesn't make me go like, what? Well, I'm against Viktor Orban because the things being done in this country and to this country and to our civilization more generally by people who criticize Orban, worry me a lot more than this. But I think a lot of our people these days, they're so binary. They can't seem to understand that you can think this is a terrible thing while at the same time thinking that there are many terrible things in the world, and I would rather deal with this terrible thing and stick by Orban than say I'm going to abandon him over this, and then open the door for so many worse things. Because one of the people I talked to this morning told me, she said, she goes, I'm not a fan of this government, but I fear that if the opposition gets in, they're in such disarray that they won't do whatever the European Union tells them to do, and that's going to be bad for this country. I hear that a lot from people.
Yeah, and that's the bind, right? I mean, the problem with cross-institutional breakdown, corruption, and rot is that what can we do? Where can we go? How do we rebuild trust? Because I don't know what's worse.
Can I give you an example?
Yeah, please.
Donald Trump, corrupt. I think, corrupt in ordinary ways, incompetent, you name it. Okay. And I know people who voted for him knowing all this, but saying the alternative is worse. Well, here's what they mean, I think. Right now, the Obama administration has been called out. The Biden administration.
But you repeat yourself.
Yeah, I repeat myself. It's been called out for changing the name of mothers in federal documents to birthing people. Now, that to me is a much more dangerous form of corruption, because you're corrupting language and you're corrupting the very idea of motherhood and family.
Right.
So I would much rather have an incompetent bureaucrat who robbed us blind, but who wasn't corrupted that way, than someone who was scrupulously honest, but destroyed the concept of motherhood and destroyed the English language in that way, because that intellectual corruption is a much deeper form and one that's harder to fight.
Well, I mean, look, I want to push back with you a little bit on this one. I mean, like, what level of corruption does, Orange Man enact that rises to the level of this sort of civilizational altering challenges to reality, like birthing person?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just being honest here.
No,
Like, this is, I mean, fine. Like, I get the tweets, and I get the, my inauguration was bigger than other people's. I mean, I don't care. I mean, whatever. This is so dumb, but I don't know. Maybe I just find he's more of a clown than a menace. But maybe, I don't want to, maybe there's no need to legislate or litigate, I should say. Maybe there's no need to litigate the past, but I just don't see how it adds up. I really don't.
Here's the point, though. I think we can agree on this, is that fewer and fewer people have any trust in institutions. If I were a Hungarian voter, there's no question I would still vote for Orban's party, all other things considered, because I think they're much less likely to do harm than the opposition. But I suspect that there are people who will vote for the opposition having no trust in them either, but for exactly the same reason. I think it's much less likely to do harm. I think what we're dealing with, Kale, is across society, just a collapse of faith in institutions. And you can look at the numbers. They tell you that this is the case. When we get to an institution like the Catholic Church, that's huge, because if you lose the churches, if the churches lose all credibility, then that opens a door to some really nasty things.
I'm just fascinated that you use the word "if," Rod. Can you please justify using the word "if" there?
Yeah,
I'm serious.
No, I mean,
if our religious institutions lose the trust of the rank and file, Joe churchgoer like you and me.
Well, I guess
here we are, right? And so maybe that's sort of the clunky transition, that we need. But I do think it's of a piece, and I guess that's why I kept us here for 10 minutes here, trying to transition to part 2 here, which is the latest Motu Proprio from Pope Francis. That was.
What's a Motu Proprio, my Catholic friend?
I don't remember the exact Latin translation.
Just a document.
It's a document promulgated by the Pope. This is on sort of the church's, the Pope's legislative prerogative in terms of managing church practice, right? It's the latest Motu Proprio. It's called Traditionis Custodes, which I think must be Latin for doublespeak, or Latin for skullduggery, because what he has done is he has overturned a Motu Proprio from his predecessor, Benedict XVI, called Summorum Pontificum. And what Summorum Pontificum did was basically universalize amongst all the dioceses and archdioceses around the globe the ability to allow the priest to celebrate Mass in the old form. And again, this is a little bit of inside baseball for those of you who are not.
Meaning.
Yeah, the old form of the liturgy. So in, I think, 1970, thereabouts, the Mass of Pope Paul VI was promulgated, called the Novus Ordo. And basically, it altered things pretty considerably in terms of the way that Catholics celebrate Mass. And one of the items, of course, is the most obvious one is sort of a move to the vernacular away from Latin. but it's not just a language question. It's also the forms and the prayers and the calendars and all, all of those things sort of associated with. So that, by the time I was born in 1973, and sort of grew up in the church, I was one of the earliest cohorts to never have experienced in a day in, day out, Sunday in, Sunday out basis the quote unquote the old Latin Mass, or the traditional Latin Mass. So in Benedict's Summorum Pontificum, he called the Novus Ordo the ordinary form, right? The ordinary as in the regular one, I guess. I know people can play with that word ordinary quite a bit, but just for the sake of this conversation, to make it simple, the ordinary form, which is the Mass in the vernacular of the Novus Ordo, and then the extraordinary form, which is the old traditional Latin Mass. So, okay, so
why does this matter? That's the thing.
Right.
I feel like I understand, because I follow Catholic stuff closely. I understand why this matters within the Catholic world, but to somebody who's an outsider, a Protestant or a non-believer, this seems like extreme inside baseball. Why does it matter that Pope Francis has reversed what his predecessor did and now made it very difficult to celebrate the Latin Mass?
Right. So again, to get a little bit in the history lesson here, the reason why the Benedict made this Motu Proprio is an attempt to bring about, to keep people into the fold, right? So that you had a couple of breakaway groups who decided to stick with the old Mass against the sort of the wishes of Rome, et cetera. And so there was, some excommunications and, splinter groups and all that sort of stuff. And so Benedict wanted to sort of widen the tent to include them and bring them back into the fold, and that's essentially what it did. Now, what's interesting to me, so anyway, Pope Francis has the Holy Father has decided that that this is actually not creating unity, that it's creating fracture, splitting. As he says in the letter that accompanies the Motu Proprio, that there's a lot of sort of nasty trads, basically. The nasty.
He's not
trads.
wrong about that. There are some nasty trads.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
but there are a lot of nasty Novus Ordo people too.
Well, right, and that's really where I want to get into in just a minute. But just to finish the thing, so on Friday, noon Rome time, something like that, he issued this Motu Proprio, which essentially gave all the bishops the right to shut down the TLM right away, and then any seminarian anyone who has not been ordained as of that day has to ask Rome to be able to offer the Mass in the extraordinary form, which is a fascinating wrinkle to this whole thing, because remember, this is the Pope of accompaniment. This is the Pope of going to the margins. This is a Pope of the synodal way, as we've
and now he's marginalized before. All these
of course, right, and he wants to to sort of take all of the power that has been subsumed from Vatican I on into Rome, and he wants to disperse it back out, sort of, right? Let the local ordinary take care of business, except if any priest wants to offer the Mass in this form, they have to ask Rome. I mean, so it strikes me as dishonest. And again, full disclosure right now, the reason why I never describe myself as a full trad, like I'm very traditional minded, I'm very traditional friendly. I jokingly tell my friends that I'm trad adjacent. And the reason why I can't consider myself a bona fide trad is because I don't go to the Latin Mass. I live and work at a Benedictine monastery, and they offer a very reverent Novus Ordo Mass. And so I go there with my family. It's where I work and live. And so it's part of my life. So I know that I can't call myself, sort of an official trad. But if I didn't live here, I would most certainly have been attending a traditional Latin Mass parish.
Well, let me jump in here for a second. Yeah. Also help do a little ex-Catholic explaining to people that the traditional Latin Mass is a condensed symbol within Catholic circles as far as the liberals are concerned, for the bad old days,
Right.
the pre-Vatican II days, all the repressive things that they want to leave behind.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not entirely wrong about that. And I say that even when I was a Catholic, I was like you. I was trad adjacent, but I didn't go to the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not a Catholic anymore, I see no reason at all why this shouldn't be available for people who want it. But what Francis is doing here is playing politics. It's like the last, and to my eyes, it's a last gasp of a dying generation of church liberals who are trying to crush any attempt to have links with the old days, the pre-Vatican II days. And I think that the thing that many people may not realize who don't follow this stuff closely is that traditional Latin Mass parishes are still they're very, very few compared to the sort of normal parishes, but they're growing. And they are, like in France, most of the people who go to Mass today, most of the Catholics who go to Mass, go to one of these Masses. Of
course,
And because these are the people who really deeply believe what the Catholic Church teaches is true.
And again, I always sort of like think of it like, the alien test, right? If you drop an alien into, a sort of a typical American suburban parish, you drop an alien into, a traditional Latin Mass parish, what would that alien sort of report back to you? Right. What is the point of this thing? And, I think this in particular as a member of the Eastern Orthodox Church. When you walk into the Divine Liturgy, it is incontrovertible what this thing is about. And I think that those people who go to attend the traditional Latin Mass, it is beyond a shadow of a doubt, especially a high Mass, it is beyond a shadow of a doubt that the whole point of this entire exercise is summed up in the elevation of the holy sacrifice of the Mass, right? That in the elevation of the host, the Eucharist is the point, right? If you go to a sort of a traditional, sorry, it's funny, I'm going to use that, traditional suburban parish, you're kind of left scratching your head about what's the point of this whole thing. Right, it's not at all clear, and I wonder, maybe that's been part of your own journey liturgically, especially as you make your way through into Eastern Orthodoxy. Where you've been for what 13, 14 years now,
16 years.
16 years. Wow, that it's not even a question. Like know exactly what you're there for.
Exactly, and it feels very, very different from the outside world. And
which is the point, right? I mean, that is the point of liturgy.
Exactly. And, I have to be honest with you. I'm really against triumphalism now. People like me who left the Catholic Church for whatever reason, who went into Orthodoxy, and we see this agony among the Catholics about liturgy, a lot of us tend to feel, boy, thank God we don't have to deal with that, because the liturgy is, Orthodoxy has a lot of problems, but our bishops do not mess with the liturgy. It is not done because the liturgy is so important, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. But I have to tell you that when I first started going to an Orthodox church, the beauty of the liturgy, the reverence, the overwhelming sacredness that just emanated from it, that's what I thought I was going to get when I became a Catholic, but did not get because of the Novus Ordo.
Right. And I think you hit exactly on it. Like, the sense of the sacred, the sense of its sort of oddity even, I think points to, I think the reason why traditional Latin Mass parishes have flourished, especially in the era of COVID here, is that it's meaningful. I mean, I'm a little bit more suspect of the beauty argument because, anyway, I that's there, and me, I'm motivated by that in a very big way personally. But I think what's so clear to people who have found their way and fallen in love with the traditional Latin Mass is that it means something. It is not frivolous. It is holy. Right. And holy and sacred is that thing which is set aside. And I think that is the important thing. So anyway, to get at the bigger level, I think that this pontificate has prided itself on, what he said, go make a mess. And,
wait, stop. What did he say? When did he say that?
Oh
The
gosh.
Pope say, "Go make him." Hagen Leo, it was something he
Hagen
said early in his
Leo.
pontificate.
Yeah, it's like
But he
second year.
basically, yeah, it was his way of saying, like, let's just make a big mess here and let's see what happens, which
You
is
know,
a crazy thing for any Pope to say. But yeah, but
right,
that's his attitude.
right. And you know, and it's such an expression of that, you know, this sort of, in my estimation, a naive sort of mid-century belief in, you know, the essential goodness of things. I don't know. It's
What could
very
it hurt?
grating.
Let's change things. What could it hurt?
Yeah, what could it hurt, right? You know, it's sort of the absolute antithesis of sort of that notion of Chesterton's fence, right? You know, the notion of Chesterton's fence is that if you're walking in the woods and you come across a wall, Chesterton's wall, I think, the proper attitude toward the wall is, you know, that's a wall there. I don't know what it's for, but it must have had a purpose, versus, you know, you run into the wall and say, oh, let's tear this down. It shouldn't be here. And, you know, you need to ask that basic question, you know, what is the proper standpoint? To me, it's always, let's think about what we're doing before we go ahead and wreck things. You know, so this whole, I mean, the frankly, the idiocy of saying go make a mess is in my mind deeply irresponsible of a leader to do this. And you know, um, you know, I have no nice words to say about Pope Francis in this context at all. And this puts me in a really uncomfortable position as a Catholic, right? But you know, my question, you know, to this is, you know, it seems to me disruption without a cause. You know, how is this aiding, you know, the central work of conversion? Right. If the point of liturgy is to convert us more closely to the gospel and to Christ, how is this helping? It doesn't seem to me that this is helping. I think what it helps is perhaps a misbegotten sense of unity by fiat. But I can't see how this is in any way aiding the holiness, the goal of holiness for the rank and file member. Look, I have family members who go to the traditional Latin Mass. These are good people who desire above all things to honor and worship the Lord and raise their kids and pass on the faith. I mean, these are the kind of people who took to heart, you know, your call for the Benedict option. They're weird and they know it, and they're doing it on purpose. So like for me personally, even though I don't go to a traditional Latin Mass parish, like this is deeply troubling to me because it's hurting people I love.
Well, let me.
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, let me pull out a little bit for our listeners who aren't Catholic. Why does this matter to the rest of us? And I'll tell you, this is what it looks like from my point of view. I'm Eastern Orthodox, but there are only a minuscule number of people like me in the West. I think the future of the West depends on the strength of the Catholic Church. To a secondary degree, but still important degree, the health of evangelical Christianity. But I think primarily the Catholic Church. What Francis is doing at a time when the Catholic Church is flat on its back, its bishops through their god-awful leadership or lack of leadership in the abuse scandal, as well as the failure of catechesis and formation, all these things that have happened in the last 50 years, they have devastated their own authority. So now here comes Francis to reverse something that his predecessor put into place to help the most faithful, devout, committed Catholics stay in the church. And now he's gone and just reversed that suddenly, thrown it in their face, and left a lot of them in disarray. Now, go ahead.
Sorry. No, but what's so frustrating to me is like, you know, and so my traditional friends are sort of like, okay, so Pachamama's great. You go ahead and do the Pachamama thing, have these ridiculous, you know, things happen on the Vatican grounds, you know, LGBT masses, right? The German synodal way, all this sort of stuff. It's always fascinating for me to watch what leadership decides to punch down on. Why are you punching down on your most faithful and fervent people, like the ones who actually want to live out the gospel? Why would you punch down on them? It's just shocking to me.
I think there must be at some level a guilty conscience there, because the fact that Latin Mass people exist and that they're a small but thriving community is a rebuke to the whole Vatican II project, and if Francis can eliminate those, then he thinks he's dealt with the problem. But I think that, I put this on my blog in the Diocese of Bristol, England. It's got a different name, but it's Bristol, England. The bishop there shut down Latin Mass immediately after the Pope's document, but then at the same time, he's offering a special LGBT Mass.
Of course.
For people who define themselves by what the Catholic Church still, for now, teaches is a sinful orientation. So the Latin Mass is intolerable in the Diocese of Bristol, but the LGBT Mass is something to be celebrated.
Right. I mean, so this is clown world, right? I mean, this is clown world level stuff. I think the tell, Rod, is that I don't know. There's a Catholic journalist named Father Thomas Rees. He's a fellow Jesuit, liberal Jesuit of the Holy Fathers, and he came out. Remember, there was an interesting timing here because Francis promulgates this Motu Proprio in the aftermath of I think an 8 or 9 day stay in the hospital. So Rees, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, just prior to the Motu Proprio, being like, yeah. So basically, Francis is a failed pontificate because, all the stuff that we wanted to have happen, he's done nothing on, and now he's going to die. So this is the end. And he even says this fascinating line, something like, trying to find young Catholic priests who share Pope Francis's vision for the future of the church is like trying to find a unicorn. And of course, I'm sitting there reading like, yeah, idiot. That's exactly right, because they don't exist. So I, in certain respects, feel that this is sort of like the last gasp effort of that kind of spirit of Vatican II church to try to imprint itself on the church. But I just don't see it as the future. I just don't think that's the future of the church. Not this problem that we're living through right now, notwithstanding.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think you're right about that. And I think that at some point, some future pope who is maybe now a seminarian will come in, flip it back around again, and welcome the Latin Mass. What will have happened in the meantime? What will have happened in the meantime is Catholic people will have come to see the pontificate as being something like electing a president. You get a new administration and policies change. That is something radically new. I don't know if it's ever been seen in the Roman Church.
And the whole point, look, Rod, you and I have talked about this, but our attraction to Roman Catholicism, when we were in our early 20s, was precisely the sense, and I guess, this got dashed for you, and, I'm holding on here, but was the sense that the Catholic Church was going to be some kind of bulwark, some kind of Rock of Peter, upon which the buffets of modernity and post-modernity would not crash. And so I'm in this uncomfortable position as the resident Roman Catholic of the podcast here, of saying, like, I'm losing my faith in that as a reality.
Yeah, no.
How can I not? I mean, I'm looking at the mess that Francis is creating, and think about the markers like communion, coherence, unity. Where are those things? The inviolability of revelation. Like, where is this stuff? And so is it like, the Obama administration comes and does a couple of things, and then the Trump administration comes in and through executive order rewrites those things and is there for 4 years, and then the Biden administration comes and then undoes those things, and like churches can't run this way. Like this is
not a Catholic church anyway.
Yeah, right.
A church that makes the claims that the Catholic Church does.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting way to think about it too. You started out talking about correctly that the Latin Mass makes you feel that there's something eternal here, that something really matters. It's standing outside of time. It gives you that impression. What Francis has done by doing this is he's brought the papacy and the church, the institutional church, down to the level of the temporal, in the same way that the Novus Ordo does. In other words, if the papacy can flip back and forth policies like that with according to the whims of each successive pontiff, then the church is not actually a divine institution,
Right.
but this is the impression, but is human, fully human, like any other. We know the church is both divine and human, Orthodox Church too. Don't misunderstand me, but the church desperately needs to stand above this sort of thing. And Francis is really, really messing this up. And I say this as somebody who considers myself an ally of the Catholic Church.
No. Obviously, you and I are brothers in Christ, and you've always been very careful about being triumphant about the messes that I've been suffering through these last few years, just as an aware Roman Catholic. But I was on my run this morning with my dogs, and it just sort of hit me again, like the Pope is a Jesuit. and despite my deep affection for Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and I am a big fan of him, his work, of his examen, of his retreat style. I mean, it's great stuff. I gotta, but it is so troubling, that we have what has come to be the heterodox Jesuit order, like they're running the show. And it's, I mean, should this be shocking to any of us? Probably not.
Well, we live in a time where a lot of things are turned upside down, and to go from the sublime to the ridiculous. This week we learned that the National Football League, the NFL, is going to be playing the so-called Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, before every game this fall. Well, Lift Every Voice and Sing is a beautiful song.
Yes, it is.
But this is the football game, a source of unity. What's wrong with the national anthem being played? There's one national anthem. There are not two national anthems, because playing the Black national anthem inevitably makes people think that the other national anthem is not for Black people. It's the white national anthem.
That's correct.
And this is really crazy and destructive and bad. But this is what the NFL has decided to do. And this is not a small thing. These symbols deeply matter. A nation is known by and defined by the stories it tells about itself, by the symbols it shares in common. And you and I have talked in the past on this podcast and privately about Mary Douglas, the British cultural anthropologist she's the one who came up with the phrase condensed symbols, if I'm not mistaken. Things that stand for much more than what they stand for.
Right.
She said, and the famous example she used in her book was Catholics eating fish on Friday.
Right.
She said that when the church got rid of that in the 60s, it threw away more than it realized it was throwing away, because however meaningless it may have seemed on the surface, this was a symbol that helped Catholics, like poor Irish Catholic workers in England, for example, realize who they were.
That's right.
And
those small little distinctives that give you a sort of a sense of, hey, we're like in this together. Like, this is what we are. We're mackerel snappers. That kind of thing. Right. Yep.
And so with this thing that the NFL is doing, it's just one more example of the politicization of everything. Which
it's also I just want to point this out. This is the capture of woke capital, right? I mean, there's a real sort of sleaziness to what the NFL is doing here, is because they're trying to break up the narrative, because it actually generates potentially more dollars for them. Right. Yeah. Maybe it's a nod to labor. I don't know, but it's very nasty stuff. And again, what's so difficult for me about this is it's, and maybe this makes it a little bit different than the Pope Francis situation, is that, these are just decisions that are being made at the corporate level, sort of nameless, faceless corporate level, that are going to be hugely consequential, especially as we struggle to hold on to some sense of a national narrative here.
Because all of these people who make these decisions, these elites,
Mhm.
they've already gone over and accepted wokeness as the successor ideology to liberalism.
Correct.
And now they're going to use it to transform these institutions. But what they don't understand is they are greatly discouraging people at the lower level. People feel like, God, one more thing that has to be politicized. We can't have anything that hasn't been forced on us and forced to play a role in the revolution. Whether we're queering this or, now even football has to be made over and over again to carry the weight of this revolution. You know what it reminds me of? These terrible evangelical movies where everything has to be turned to explicitly talk about Jesus.
Yeah, the altar call moment at the end of every movie. Yep.
Yeah, and because there's so much fear of subtlety and fear that if we don't make everything explicitly about Jesus, people aren't going to get the message.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's going on here, except their religion is wokeness.
Right.
And I think it ends up it becomes so airless and forced that I think it's going to breed a lot of resentment. And the last thing this country needs right now is more racial resentment.
Well, because it's a driver of ideology, and I guess what I'm recognizing as we make our way through these topics is, I don't know if you knew this, but I'm a big Neil Young fan. And he had a great song on an album back in the 70s called, Rust Never Sleeps. And I recognize sort of with these cultural encroachments, these movements of woke ideology and movements away from tradition or movements away from trust, is that these forces are nasty and they don't sleep. And how do you deal with rust? Right. I mean, I think that's the question for cultural and religious conservatives like you and me, is how do we guard against the encroachments of rust? It's tough, man. It's like I feel like you have to be constantly vigilant. It's not even just vigilant. It sounds so trite to say I have to be vigilant. It's like, but so much of my frustration with folks who I think are basically sympathetic to what you talk about or what I talk about is that this continual refusal to acknowledge the stakes of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that frustrates, the rust is coming. Like it doesn't stop. Just because you go to bed at night doesn't mean it stops.
There's some guy on commenter on my blog. I don't know what his name is. He doesn't have a discus name, but he keeps saying, I want you to prayerfully consider that maybe you're making people fear and that. And I'm like, you want me to quit saying that the house is on fire when in fact it's on fire, but it makes you nervous for me to say that. And, forget it. I'm not going to play that game anymore. And I've been exhilarated is too strong a word, but I've been heartened by seeing some of the pushback from Catholic trads and trad adjacent people to what Pope Francis has said, because some of it is ugly and I don't like that, but a lot of it's just like, we've got to stop lying to ourselves, because there's always this. I remember this from my Catholic days too, when I was struggling over the abuse scandal. The house was on fire, but most Catholics in my parish, they were living with double-mindedness, because I think that if they saw the thing for what it was, they would have had to act in a very different way, a way that made them uncomfortable for the sake of justice, for the sake of cleaning up the church and setting things right. They didn't want to do that. So people like me were deemed alarmists. It's classic, kill the messenger. Well, I think trads are now in that place today.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I look, I'm a big believer in meaning. I think meaning trumps non-meaning all the time. And so that our task, I think you see your task this way, I see my task this way, is that, we can never become so cynical that we lose our faith in meaning. And one of the reasons why I like Peterson, for instance, is that he is this insistence that we are meaning seeking and meaning producing creatures, and we can never let the forces of ideology take that away from us. Like, this stuff matters, you matter, our lives matter, our kids' lives matter, which is interesting because I'm using that word matter. And no matter what the sort of the scoundrels of ideology would have us believe, that we have a responsibility. to do that, and we shoulder it. And so, look, it gives me zero pleasure to sit on here for the last half of this podcast and rant about Pope Francis. But I'm a man. I have a brain. I have a heart, and I have a soul, and I have an intellect. And I'm not going to not say things that I'm not seeing right in front of my face, because out of fear it might offend someone's delicate sensibilities.
Yeah.
It's too important to sort of play those kind of prissy games, to be honest with you.
Well said. And the last 20 years ought to have taught Catholics that docility. This is the kind of docility that the legionaries of Christ pushed on Regnum Christi on its people. And it was all to cover up corruption. And
a real monster. I mean, let's not forget a real monster.
Yeah, right? They sealed it. I want to say, before, I can see we're running out of time, but I want to say this is the cost. To wrap things up, the cost of the loss of authority. Right. I knew myself when I was getting to the end of my days as a Catholic. I knew that things were coming to an end when I thought about my two boys who were small then.
Sure.
I said, what if one of them came to me one day and said, I feel that God is calling me to the priesthood. Right. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I would throw myself in front of them to keep them from doing it. Yeah. Because not that I think being a priest is a bad thing, but because I love my kids so much, I would not want to see him thrown into that pit of vipers that I come to see through my investigations. In a similar way, let's flash forward to the last year or so. I mentioned to you several times that my son, Lucas, who's 17, he's a weightlifter, he's a dude.
Right.
He's wanted to go into the U.S. military for
since
all the
he was
right
a little
reasons.
boy. Since he was a little boy, yeah.
Yeah, and I even asked him, it was so charming a year ago, this is what going to a classical school will do for you. I said, so why do you want to be in the military so much? He said, well, I would like to have adventure, find brotherhood, gain honor, and serve my country. I mean, this is straight out of recruit.
Yeah, real things.
Men with chests sort of things.
Right.
And this was completely unfeigned by him. He's really that much of a devotee of these things. He had gotten this from reading the Iliad and all this stuff. Okay, so I started to tell him, and I could see the military was getting super woke. I started saying, son, I don't think this is for you, because I don't want you to be in a position where you have to choose between your faith or your position in the military or being disobedient. And he gave a lot of pushback on that, but I've been kind of going at it because I want him to know that I'll support him whatever he chooses.
Yeah, of course.
But
but eyes wide open, right? I mean, I think the thing that I would counsel for my own children, look, I mean, my own brother is a late vocation. He's entered the seminary for the Roman Catholic Church, Diocese of Baton Rouge, and look, he's a smart guy. He's smarter than me, and faith-filled, serious man, and he's doing it. I trust him. He's
a mature man.
Yeah,
too.
he's in his mid 40s. He's no joke. He's seen a lot of stuff. He's a deep man of prayer. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't think, man, I've been watching this institution, that selects for abusers, right? And my question, of course, is always like, how are they going to get to my brother? Yeah. How are they going to undermine him? How are they going to compromise him? So I pray for him every day. Obviously, he's a good man, and I believe he's genuinely called to this. And I'm so proud of him for responding to the call. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I didn't have deep concerns.
So I texted my son Lucas this past weekend. I said, look, I just had coffee with the Hungarian army officer, and we were just talking about these changes, how woke the U.S. military is getting. And he told me, we have to do trainings, NATO trainings with some of them. And so one of my buddies had just got back from a training in the U.S. and his instructor was, a male to female transgender wearing female army uniform. And he's telling me that, what he's picking up over there is that if you're not 100% down with wokeness, you're done in the military. Wow. You will not have a career. And I've heard this sort of thing too from other friends of mine who are in the military. So I told Lucas this. He said, yeah, Dad, I've decided I'm not going to do this. I was so relieved, but this is where we are. I have so little trust in this fundamental institution of our country. And on that happy note, Kale, I can tell you've got
I got to run, but I mean, I think that, we have to, we have to continue to pray. We have to continue to seek the Lord's guidance in these matters, and walk into all these situations. I think our project, if I could sort of distill it, at least for today, is like, look, eyes wide open. Eyes wide open. We have to be adults about this stuff. We have to look these things sort of squarely in the face and recognize what we're facing. And I guess my frustrations about a lot of the people in social media is that they continually are begging me to not believe my lying eyes. And I'm just not going to play that game, and that's why I appreciate your work. So, all right. Well, on that note, Rob, why don't you send us out of here, brother?
Don't get nothing on you.
Take care. Bye-bye.